Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to this midweek review with Mr. John. Last week, we touched on promises. Promises that we can keep and sometimes we can't keep. But we learned last week that there is someone who does keep every promise they ever made, and that is God. God makes a promise no matter how hard or how difficult it may seem to keep. God keeps them. He keeps every promise. And that is a promise from God that he's going to keep his promises. Does that make sense? I guess so, but to me it does. But God does keep his promises. And one of his earliest promises in the Bible was to a man named Noah. You see, at the time, the world had kind of stepped away from God. They had kind of stopped believing in him, started acting out, doing all kinds of things that were against God, except for Noah. Noah was a man of God, and he kept living a righteous life, living a life of God. And so God said, listen, I've got to do something. I've got to change the trajectory of what's going on, got to change the direction of how the earth is going. And I'm going to do something that's going to be awful. So he goes to Noah and he says this, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. He goes on to tell Noah, in these 120 years, he needs to build this boat. He needs to build an ark. And his job is to get this thing built. He's got 120 years to do this because God's going to do something that he needs this ark for. And he gives him explicit directions on how to do it, how long, how big, how high, how many levels. He gives him all this information. After Noah starts building all this, God comes back to him and says, you are to collect 2 of each animal of the earth and load them onto the ark. He loads them on the ark. After all these years go by, 120 years, or I don't even know if it was that long, come to pass, Noah gets the ark built. And God is going to let loose what he has promised he was going to do all these years earlier. He's going to bring down rain to flood the earth. He is going to destroy what he created in all the life on the earth except for what is on the ark. And God lets loose this flood. We know that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And when it stopped, the ark is on the river, or on all this water, not a river. It couldn't be a river. It's the whole entire earth is flooded underwater. So Noah and them are floating around on the ark, the only survivors of this cataclysmic event that God has unleashed. But God had to do this to get rid of all the sin on the earth. So Noah, a few days later, after all the rain had stopped, they'd been floating around, he takes a raven, a crow type animal, a raven, and he lets it loose, and the raven goes to search for land. He's hoping that the raven will come back with some semblance, something that will tell them that land is out there. He lets go of the raven, and the raven doesn't come back. So a little bit later, Noah lets go of a dove, and we've all come to know the picture of the dove flying back to the ark with the olive branch in its little clutches, and they know that the waters are receding, land is coming back, and soon the earth will come back to the way it was. But God does something miraculous in this. He gives us a symbol. He puts a rainbow into the clouds. And I want to read you from the Bible exactly what God does here. He says, I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant, the promise between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all the living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant, the promise between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth. This promise is that every time we see a rainbow in the sky, those beautiful rainbows of all the 5 beautiful colors, after maybe a light rain or a huge rainstorm or just things that come down and it could be a tornado type storm. It could be just a little drizzle outside. But every time it stops and we go outside and the rainbow appears, it is God's promise to us that he will never do again what he did to scourge the earth of all the sin that was there. He will never again flood the earth. And as far as I know, to my knowledge, he's kept that promise, right? We haven't had another flood. We haven't had to build another ark. Now, there are times when it rains and rains and rains and we're stuck inside and we're all make that joke, oh, I think we all need to build the ark. But God has kept his promise that he will not flood the entire earth again. So, guys, this story shows how God keeps his promises. Now, there are some things that happen here that God did, he had to do. And it sounds awful, but he had to rid the earth of sin at that point. It was getting so bad. So he wanted to start again with Noah's family. And then Noah is replenish the earth. Guys, keep your promises as best you can. When you make a promise, a covenant, as we heard in the Bible saying, a covenant is a promise that God has made to us. Guys, when we make a promise, we promise to clean our room, or we promise that we're going to do better. We're going to promise to work harder this school year at things. We're going to promise that we're going to help our neighbor more. When we make these promises, don't make them to just break them. Make them to keep them. If we keep our promises, we're living a godly life. We're living like God wants us to live. When we make good promises, let's keep them. Hey, verse is coming up. We'll see you next week. Have a great one. Toodles! Our memory verse for this month is, not one of all the Lord's good promises to Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. Joshua 21:45.